end up deciding who controls Congress after the midterm elections of just a
I wanted to say there's no, I know and I understand in principle that gerrymandering is bad and okay, but, the fact is that the Republicans have been using it all over the place. They come into my channel and they're like, you Democrats had to change the maps because you're so unpopular. That no, that's not how any of this shit works. I mean, you're delusional. I have a long memory, and you have been screwing the fucking shit up for a long time, and fucking with the system to tilt it in the direction that you wanted it to go in, and everything. And so we know this.
Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines a coup d'état as a sudden, decisive exercise of force in politics, especially the violent overthrow or alteration of an existing government by a small group. Modern parlance has created alternative meanings for the word, and it is the one that seems to fit, despite most coups being quick, and this one taking years. When Barack Obama won with over 69 million votes,
it may be legal,
majority of
right, and changing the maps, right, it may be technically, legal, but it is cheating. It's legalized cheating. That's what it is. At the end of the day, this is corruption, and this is what the GOP has done. The thing is, people hate them. They do not like the Republicans. They've voted against them time after time after time. I have discussions with people all the time that talk about, wishing these people dead, and I'm not in the minority on that. A lot of us fucking hate them, literally hate them. We wish them dead. We fucking despise these people and will shit on their graves, and we're proud of it. We feel no remorse or any shame whatsoever about being haters of the conservatives. One should hate a conservative. It's good to hate them, and you're better than them if you do. I don't feel any shame or remorse about it. It's out in the open, and it's and the thing is that I'm not a minority. It's a huge amount of the country that literally hates these people's guts. These fucking Republicans, and they act with extreme confidence. They'll come into my comments section all it should be the 90. It should be, the 99% of the right-wingers versus the 5% of lefties. We aren't 5% of the fucking population. You've rigged the maps, and it's made you think that people actually like you, when the majority of us literally wish death upon you and the entire base of Republican voters. We hate all 76 million Americans who voted for Trump and hope they die in the next 10 seconds. That would make us happy. The only good maggot is a dead maggot. Fuck them all. Yeah, I said it, and I'm not sorry.
The House and a supermajority in the Senate, how could Republicans ever hope to compete again? The first answer comes with Project Red Map.
You people are not even fucking human beings to me. You're subhuman mongrels. Fuck you.
Majority Project. The Republican State Leadership Committee sought to strategically flip state legislature seats in 2010. They targeted 107 state legislative races in swing states like Wisconsin.
And I'm not a minority. The only reason why the election doesn't reflect the reality is you've rigged the maps.
Michigan, Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania. This doesn't sound on its face to be a bad thing. Any political party is going to want to utilize tactics to get out the vote and win more seats on Election Day. However, the nefarious nature of the plan was not that they just wanted to flip the seats. They wanted to do it in a year where redistricting would take place shortly thereafter, since the census was being tallied. This way, they could gerrymander state and congressional districts in such an extreme level that they could make it impossible for the Democrats to compete in these states. To be clear, Each side has gerrymandered. There are some bizarre lines that have been drawn. Here is an example. But the goal here was to seize control of the map and then draw districts in such a way that the balance of power was offset by ridiculous degrees. According to their own website, they spent millions over several states, specifically to flip state legislatures and draw the maps accordingly. And the result? Despite Barack Obama winning re-election in 2012, and despite there being 1.4 million less votes for the GOP overall in congressional races,
we
the
despise
GOP
them with everything in us, and there's nothing but hatred for us. We hate everything about them. I think they have not a single redeeming trait. There's nothing good about a fucking piece of shit who votes for this party. They are vile from top to bottom. There's not a single good thing about them, and I wish death upon each and every fucking one of them within the next 10 seconds! And I'm proud of that!
And Republicans, the GOP managed to win 13 out of 18 seats in the House of Representatives. Ohio wasn't much different, with 16 House seats. Despite Obama winning a majority of the popular vote in Ohio, only 4 House seats went to the Democrats. This isn't to say that this portion of the GOP coup has not had some roadblocks. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in 2018 that the maps drawn 7 years prior clearly, plainly, and palpably violated the state constitution. This forced a judicial redraw of the map. Democrats got 2.7 million votes compared to
any Republican who wants to come into this comment section and whine about how you're 47% of the population in certain states and have no seats. I don't care! I don't want to enfranchise you! Imagine wanting to share power with your mortal enemies. I don't want you represented. I would be much happier in a country in which you were all declared felons and stripped of the right to vote and reduced to second-class citizens. Because you should be, and that would be a just world, unlike ours, where you had no voice in government.
Millions for the Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania in 2018. But this time the districts were split evenly.
You are my
for the
mortal
Democrats
enemies.
and 9 for the Republicans. The Democrats should have won one more seat, but clearly 9-9 is a much closer representation of the will of the people than 5-13 was. Ohio, on the other hand, maintained its congressional districts, and despite Democrats winning a clear majority of the votes in the state of Ohio, the GOP maintained a 12-4 lead in seats controlled by Republicans in the House of Representatives. In the 2018 midterms, it took Democrats getting almost 10 million more votes than the Republicans nationwide in House of Representative elections in order to gain.
Imagine wanting to share power with your enemies. I don't. That's a pathology I don't happen to share. So I don't value giving you a voice or representation or any of that shit. I don't care at all. Not even the slightest bit. Fuck you and the earth on which you stand.
9 seats and win back the House. Remember, the GOP maintained a 33-seat lead after the 2012 elections, despite getting 1.4 million less votes than the Democrats. It's clear that the GOP understands that it can't win the battle of ideas in the long term. This series of videos will describe the tactics being used so that they can rule as a minority party if we let them. Remember, if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, like the video. Voter suppression by conservatives is a time-honored tradition. Conservatives created poll taxes and literacy tests in order to keep the people they wanted to continue to oppress from having their say in elections. In order for the GOP coup to continue, voter suppression would need to continue as well. This means, first and foremost, making sure that the people casting votes are as old and as white as possible. Let's look at a few examples of Republican voter suppression. The first collection of examples are brought to you by the ruling in Shelby v. Holder, a narrow ruling in 2013 that overturned Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act that required pre-clearance by the federal government in states listed in Section 5 before certain changes to voting could be made. The ruling, authored by Justice Roberts, basically makes the argument that because there have not been examples of widespread disenfranchisement that caused the need for the law to be created, that there is no reason for the law to continue.
That guy who took a shot at the Republican representatives during the baseball game, yeah, he's a national hero. He should be given the Medal of Honor for what he did. And pardoned.
This is like arguing that because the Mississippi River hasn't flooded New Orleans for years, that we no longer need the levees built to protect New Orleans from river water. And, as one might suspect, the floodgates were open with Shelby versus Holder. States couldn't wait to pass new laws and new policies since they now did not need pre-clearance to do so. In fact, in 2011, Governor Rick Perry of Texas signed voter ID legislation into law, and because of pre-clearance, this requirement was blocked and could not take effect. But once Shelby overturned the pre-clearance requirements, Texas was now free to implement the laws immediately. In 2013, the Republican-led legislature in North Carolina passed House Bill 589, a so-called voter ID law. However, the text of the law was not strictly limited to the requirement to present photo identification in order to cast a legal ballot in the state. The law prevents pre-registration of voters, same-day voter registration, and various other measures that have nothing to do with the requirement to have an ID to vote. The law also charges a fee to get an ID to vote if you don't already have one, despite the Constitution prohibiting poll taxes. However, there was one thing many of these measures had in common. They targeted the way voters who are black registered and voted. The law was eventually overturned. In seeking to suppress black voters from casting ballots, the GOP-led legislature investigated various ways that people voted. They took the ones that were most utilized by black voters and eliminated them. According to the ruling, the new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision, and the provisions in the law impose cures for problems that did not exist. In 2015, Wisconsin started enforcing its so-called voter ID law. This law was also not simply restricted to the requirement of showing a voter ID. It also cut back on early voting, required people to live in the ward that they voted in for 28 days prior to voting, and prohibited emailing absentee ballots to voters. Analysis of the Wisconsin law changes done by Priorities USA showed that the turnout in Wisconsin was 200,000 less than it would have been without the new laws. As a reminder, Donald Trump won Wisconsin by just under 23,000 votes. The set of all voters who cast a ballot in 2016 in Wisconsin was 6.1% more Republican and 5.7% less Democratic than the group of all voters lost to the new restrictions. If you compare states that made ID requirements stricter or less strict or had no change, the states with no change saw 1.3% higher turnout in 2016 and 2012. States with non-strict requirements saw an increase of 0.6. In the previous video in the series on the ongoing GOP coup, I discussed how the ruling in Shelby versus Holder enabled a slew of new so-called voter ID laws. These so-called voter ID laws and the other non-ID provisions contained in them are not the only effects of Shelby. Shelby also enabled large-scale voter purges in states that previously were not able to do so because of the pre-clearance requirements that were now gone. In 2018, Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp, a Republican, was running for governor. He was challenged by Stacey Abrams, a Democrat. The office of the Secretary of State is charged with running elections and specifically to maintain the voter lists. In July of 2017, his office removed over 500,000 Georgians from the voter list because they had supposedly skipped one too many elections. Of those purged, 70,000 re-registered to vote. 65% of those people registered in the same county as they had previously been registered to vote in, i.e. they had not moved. Of those purged, more came from districts that ultimately voted to support Abrams than those that voted to support Kemp. Furthermore, 53,000 voter applications were put on hold by Kemp's office over an exact match policy that he had initially implemented as Secretary of State before it was law, and then that exact match policy was codified into law after the policy was successfully challenged in the courts. Voter purges continue to this day in Georgia. They happen in other states as well. Most recently, Ohio purged voters, and many on the list were incorrect. And according to the League of Women Voters, the number of Democrats purged outnumbered Republicans by a 2-to-1 margin. A conservative group in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, or WILL for short, brought the suit stating that Wisconsin had not conducted voter purges as required by law. They seek to remove over 100,000 voters from the voting lists before the 2020 elections. A conservative group, Judicial Watch, has also sued the state of Pennsylvania to remove up to 800,000 voters in the state. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with the concept of making sure that voting lists are accurate. The problem comes with who gets targeted and if there is a disproportionate impact of those actions on minority voters. Remember the voter registrations held up by then Secretary of State Kemp in Georgia? 70% of those were from black voters, 80% of those were from minorities in general. And often the forms that are sent to verify addresses are done via mail that can't be forwarded. So the voter who is facing a purge, but who may have moved within their own district, might not even be aware of the purge. If removed voters cannot be reliably notified of their removal in time to re-register before the next election, these voters will have become disenfranchised. If voting is indeed a right, as is stated multiple times in the Constitution, shouldn't it be difficult to remove voters from the lists? Shouldn't checks be put in place to prevent unscrupulous secretaries of state from eliminating the voters of the opposition party? The Voting Rights Act, before it was gutted by an activist conservative court, sought to do just that. States that had proven themselves untrustworthy were prevented from wholesale changes to their voting laws. And now that the restrictions have been removed, these states have proven themselves untrustworthy yet again. It becomes much easier to retain your power in a coup if you're allowed to pick your voters. And so far we have seen that via gerrymandering, non-ID provisions in so-called voter ID laws, and voter purges, that the GOP has effectively been able to pick their voters and retain power despite being in the minority. Stay tuned for further segments of the GOP. In previous videos, we have seen the tactics used by the GOP to choose their voters with gerrymandering and to prevent legitimate voters from casting a ballot using various methods. However, in order to maintain the coup, the GOP needs a judicial branch that is friendly to their schemes. Donald Trump has questioned why Barack Obama left so many open vacancies at the end of his term. In all, 88 district court and 17 court of appeals vacancies were inherited by the Trump administration. Whether Donald Trump is that uninformed, or he is just trying to pretend that we all can't see what's going on, the fact is that the GOP obstruction during the final 2 years of the Obama presidency was unprecedented. We are all aware of how Merrick Garland was prevented from filling the vacancy left by Justice Scalia when he passed away. However, what doesn't get as much airplay is the amount of seats that Barack Obama was unable to fill at the district and appellate levels of the court. According to the Brookings Institute, the GOP-controlled Senate only confirmed 2 judges at the Court of Appeals level and 18 at the district court level. These totals are much less than the totals confirmed by the previous 4 presidents who served 8 terms. Turnover in the courts is a regular thing, and presidents often get to name a wide variety of judges to the federal courts. Presidents Reagan, Clinton, and George W. Bush named 22% of their judges in their last 2 years. President Obama only got to name 6%. Today, a lot of the talk is about the potential of Democrats to pack the court. What the GOP has done is stack the court in their favor. The groundwork is now being set up to enable the courts to push the coup forward. In the Democratic National Committee versus Wisconsin State Legislature ruling, the court ruled that votes mailed before Election Day but not received by Election Day could not be counted, despite a lower federal court stating that they could be accepted. Most of Kavanaugh's opinion does seem to make sense. The power to change election rules belongs to state legislatures, not the courts. However, his wording is suspect. He states, counting all votes quickly can help the state promptly resolve disputes, and that late arriving ballots might destabilize the election result. This concerns many readers that Kavanaugh and the rest of the court might use these arguments to stop counting. President Trump has already threatened to use lawyers to stop the counting of ballots. More on that in a second. In another ruling, the court was split 4-4 on Pennsylvania allowing absentee ballots to be received after Election Day and to be counted. Both states, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, typically require votes to be received by Election Day. However, the ruling that was challenged in PA was not one of a federal court, but of a state Supreme Court. That could be why Chief Justice Roberts decided to side with the liberal branch of the Supreme Court on this issue. No written arguments were released to explain the 4-4 split. However, because a 4-4 ruling sets no precedent, the decision could be revisited once Justice Barrett is seated if the case is indeed reheard. The kicker here is that we already have examples where post office delays are happening in Democratic areas. Louis DeJoy, the head of the post office, is a wealthy Republican, a Trump donor, and someone who has no experience in the post office with the exception of maybe mailing his own personal letters. It has been shown that under his leadership, there have been massive post office delays, especially in blue areas. According to CNN, some battleground states have moved less than 90% of the mail on time. In Colorado, a significant state in the 2020 elections that will determine control of the Senate, only 43% of the mail was on time this past Saturday. 62% of central Pennsylvania ballots and 54% of Atlanta ballots moved on time on Saturday. Atlanta, of course, is a major Democratic stronghold in Georgia, a state many consider to be in play for Biden and that has 2 Senate seats up for grabs. Democrats are more likely to vote by mail, and any issues with the mailing of ballots will disproportionately impact Democratic voters. DeJoy only took office this year, and he immediately took steps to slow down the mail, which drew much criticism from the congressional Democrats. If DeJoy is specifically targeting Democratic areas to slow down the mail, and the conservative wing of the Supreme Court rejects late mail-in ballots, how can this be viewed as anything but a coup?
So a Republican replying that it's 95% Republicans and only 5% liberals and everything in that fantasy that Scrinbot displayed. This is pure overconfidence. The broad majority of the American public hates Republicans to the point of wishing death on them, to the point in which it would make them quite happy and pleased if these people just died tomorrow, Just die already. Please, just die already, And it's at that kind of level about all this, clearly, based on the evidence and the broad pattern of evidence, they are hated, and so were their ideas. They don't have a messaging problem, they have a core values problem, and they and their ideas are hated by the broad majority of the public. It does not skew in the direction that you think it does. You are overconfident, and it is based on the fact that the maps have been rigged in your favor, and Republicans have cheated to win all for the last 2 decades. They have been rigging the maps and playing shenanigans and games to gerrymander like crazy, to skew everything in their favor. And you might say the Democrats have done this too, but the Democrats have been trying to, ban partisan gerrymandering, and the Republicans in Congress have, self-servingly blocked it every fucking time. So you know what? The broad majority of the American public hates you, it hates your ideas, and it hates your platform. It hates everything about you, and it wishes death upon you, Republicans. And yet you think you're a majority. You're not. You've cheated. So you're not like the thing about Congress and the Senate is that at the state legislators, it's all hilariously unrepresentative of what the American people actually are and what they actually think. Congress and all the state legislators couldn't, for the most part, couldn't be
further out of touch with the American people. But, whatever, keep on proving how full of yourself you actually are in my comment section. People don't like you.